are you? I'm Cassidy Quinn, and this is Mentally Together. Because whether we can see it on the surface or not, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. And whatever our brains are experiencing, we're not alone. We're together. Are you ever feeling something? Like maybe you're feeling super anxious about something or really sad about something, but you don't ever actually say it out loud to anyone else? Not because you're scared they'll judge you or you think you're wrong for feeling that way, but just because you don't really have the right words for it. And then at some point you hear someone else say something, or you read something in an article or see it on social media, and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that is exactly how I have been feeling. I am not alone. This is normal. And you just described it perfectly. That is how I felt when I read an article a few months ago. And I can so clearly remember this exact moment. I was sitting in a hotel in Beijing, China, when I was there covering the Olympics. I was sitting eating my breakfast one morning, and I was scrolling on my phone reading the New York Times. And this article popped up with the headline, "Climate Change Enters the Therapy Room." With the subheading, 10 years ago, psychologists proposed that a wide range of people would suffer from anxiety and grief over climate. Skepticism about that idea is gone. Mind blown emoji. That was me eating my breakfast. I mean, I don't know about you. You've probably done the same thing. Read a million articles about climate change, watch a bunch of documentaries about climate change, but I personally have never really connected anxiety and grief specifically to it. So this article talks about something called eco-anxiety and how, as you might imagine, it is both rational and existential. And as I read these words, I thought, oh wow, yep, this is what I have been feeling for who knows how long, but just didn't have the words for it. I mean, it makes way too much sense that so many of us are struggling with fear and overwhelm about the state of the world, and it is wearing on our brains and our bodies. The article, which, by the way, I will put a link to in the show notes if you want to go read it, it talks about multiple people, including a therapist who specializes in helping people with exactly this. He practices something called eco-psychology, and I looked him up. Turns out he lives in Portland, which is where I live, so immediately I was like, I have to talk to this guy. It's Dr. Thomas Doherty. Dr. Doherty is a psychologist who specializes in applying an environmental perspective to mental health and well-being. He works with individuals and couples and also does a lot of workshops to teach therapists and other groups and organizations how to apply the approach in their own work. In 2011, aka over 10 years ago, he co-wrote a paper with Susan Clayton called The Psychological Impacts of Global Climate Change. And that paper has been cited over 700 times. And now Dr. Doherty has his own podcast called Climate Change and Happiness, where he talks about all of this with his co-host, Dr. Panu Piccola, who's an environmental researcher and writer. The podcast is fascinating, and so far they have covered topics like how climate change is affecting people's decisions about whether or not to have children, how to hold space for people and their climate feelings, and all the cynicism, shame, guilt, sadness, inadequacy, and all the other feelings we all might be having about our role in the changing environment. Clearly, Dr. Doherty has a lot to say about all this, which is really great news because clearly we all have a lot to feel about all this. So I loved talking to him about his advice for those of us struggling with eco-anxiety, the mental health benefits of getting outside in nature, and how we can figure out our own environmental identity. So let's get into it with Dr. Thomas Doherty. Thank you for being here. Especially taking the time to do this, because I can imagine in your line of work, there's not really a time where like, oh, nobody needs help. We're good now.
Well, thanks, Cassidy. As we were talking and getting started earlier here, I mean, I'm working in the podcast world here too, so it's good for me to help out other podcasters, and and I am in my work day. I will see some clients today on Zoom after we're done, and so yes, this is part of my day. And since COVID, since the pandemic, a lot of my work has switched to online. So I'm working out of my home office, which is where a lot of things are happening.
Yeah. Does it seems like in some ways it's a particularly difficult time in the world from a therapist's perspective. Does it feel like that based on talking to your clients, or is it kind of just a normal phase of the universe, I guess?
Well, I have two answers to that. I mean, one of the things I try to do with people is put things in perspective. And, a lot of times we have to remind ourselves how lucky we really are and how good we have it. A lot of our problems, our first world problems, depending on what our life is, not that it doesn't cause suffering and pain, but, we have the ability to kind of reframe and do gratitude. And, that turns on a part of your brain that's helpful for mental health and gets dormant when you're depressed. And so gratitude and reframing is great, but it has really been a tough last couple of years, really with so many things going on. Obviously with the climate change work I'm doing, it is really, heated up, pardon the pun. I mean, it's just really, it's really become much more of a personal issue for people. There's always been people over the years that have been strongly environmentally minded and connected to the earth, and they've had concerns about environmental issues and suffering about that. And so that's not new, but the rolling out of climate change impacts in people's daily lives, particularly here in the Pacific Northwest, with the heat dome and the fires and the smoke and various storms, it's no longer an abstract, distant thing. And that's
the first recorded measurable April snow in Portland ever. 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Bizarre.
Yeah. And this isn't really a surprise. We kind of knew intellectually that climate change would be happening. This is all what has been predicted, but still it's one thing to have it be intellectually known, it's another thing to live it. And then over the last couple of years with the pandemic, which is another huge, once in a lifetime, hopefully stressor for people, and economic issues, the Black Lives Matter protests here in Portland. So the confluence of all those things has been super tough. So I like to not be spoiled and think that we have it worse than earlier generations and earlier times in history. But this has truly been a tough time for a lot of people. So yeah.
Well, I guess in a way that's nice to hear from a therapist. Like, okay, if we're really struggling, it's not
normal to struggle.
Yeah.
No, if you feel like it's been a hard 2 years, it has definitely been a hard 2 years. Even just the intersection of heat and smoke, and then the isolation and the distancing of COVID has made, these problems have made it harder. They've made it harder for us to cope. That's one of the reasons why it's harder, been more different, during COVID, a lot of people were enjoying getting outside and walking and getting some fresh air. But then when the heat and the smoke hit, they couldn't do that. So it really took away, people's coping skills, and it made it that much harder. It just turned up the dial.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing people come to you for therapy for all kinds of different things. Is that true?
Yeah, my practice has been evolving pretty quickly. I mean, I've always been a little bit unique. I mean, I do have a traditional mental health practice as a psychologist where I see clients and couples, and there are the kind of the bread and butter issues of counseling that, people come in for, the relationships and their jobs and stress and anxiety and depression, all the human problems that we all have. And then I've had a sideline in environmental sustainability and people's connection with nature. It goes back to work I did before I became a psychologist. I used to do outdoor therapy and kind of outward bound style therapeutic trips with young people. And I taught at Lewis and Clark Graduate School, created a certificate program teaching counselors how to do outdoor therapy and how to understand environmental issues. And this is, 10 years ago or something like that. So it was a little bit ago, but I've always had this niche. But in the last few years, it's becoming more my primary focus, in the sense that I'm getting a lot of specific, queries from people, both in my area, but also around the country and around the world, people that have heard about me and are looking for help coping with climate issues. And I'm training therapists, and that's really exciting. Yeah. I do a training group for therapists, a 10-week training to help them get up to speed on some of these issues. And I've got people coming in from all over the US and Canada and Europe and Australia. So that's really exciting and really rewarding. So, yes, one of my sayings is we have issues and issues. So that's one of my sayings. We have capital I issues and lowercase I issues, right? The capital I issues are the big things that we want to achieve in our life. That's our goals. It could be social justice or some, environmental issues, or our career, or writing a book, or creating a business, or whatever. We all have our big things that we're working on. And then we have the lowercase I issues, which is our stuff, which is our baggage, which is our vulnerabilities. It's our history, our neuroses, our wounds, our traumas, all that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, the lowercase I is infinite. There's all kinds of human things there. And so that one of the goals is helping people to get those two straight. So the lowercase I issues don't get in the way of our capital I issues, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And it makes so much sense that this, obviously, like you just explained, this is not a new topic for you. Like, you wrote a big paper about it a decade ago, or over a decade ago at this point. But to some of us, it's like, oh, this is new in the way that it's weighing on our mental health so much. Like, there's, I would imagine people come to you because some days they can't stop thinking about the environment and their guilt and the things that they're doing. And, oh my gosh, I bought this plastic water, but my boyfriend and I last night had a conversation. He wanted to keep reusing his plastic water bottle. And I'm like, but I think it's bad for you to drink out of that water bottle. Okay. But it was bad that I bought this water bottle. So now I have to keep reusing it. Like, there's all these, and that's just a little tiny thing. Then there's
it's
just
a perfect example. Yeah.
Overwhelming. Oh my God. What do I do? What have I done to the world? And how can I even think about what I want to eat for dinner when the world is on fire and the ice caps are melting?
No, it's all well said, and those mundane examples are sometimes the most important, because they're just the fabric of our life. Yeah. So one of the goals is helping people to find a middle ground where they navigate this stuff. Practically, like myself, I had the same dilemmas. I try not to use disposable products, and cups or bottles, but I try to reuse them a little bit, and then I recycle them. So I try to find a middle ground. I try to not use things once. But you're right, we have to balance some of the issues. It's interesting. Eco-anxiety is this topic that's pretty big right now, and people usually associate it with climate change. But originally, that topic came out. It started being talked about, that particular term, in the media in around 2007, give or take. But it was really about people's concerns about plastic and toxins in the environment. That's where that term associated. And then lately it's been associated more, linked with climate change. But so people have had these kind of questions, and there is a kind of a paralysis that can happen when we're just getting into it. That years ago, I worked for Greenpeace when I was younger. And I didn't really have any background in environmental issues. I was like a lot of young people. I was curious about it. I had just some general beliefs, but I didn't really know anything about. And that was a huge wake-up experience. And then, you get paralyzed about anything. Like, should I get a receipt, paper receipt? Should I use plastic bags or paper bags or cups? And then eventually, you find you find your own process there, and start to get. We can talk more about that, but I think ultimately it's about the bigger picture and the bigger goals that you have, and not getting. People get caught up in the minutia because they're not really clear on their big goals yet. And once you do things, it makes it a little easier to prioritize. I think.
Yeah. Prioritizing is a huge thing, obviously, because I know for me, sometimes the eco-anxiety, which until I read about the work you do, I never had that word for it. But, okay, something happens. Portland's on fire. We're breathing smoke outside. Or Australia's on fire. Or Portland hits 118 degrees. Or something across the world is crazy, horrible happening. And for a few days, that's all my brain can focus on. And then a few days later, something new happens in the news. And it's like, okay, that's the priority now. Or something happens in my personal life. Okay, that's the priority now. And then there's the guilt of, oh, I stopped thinking about that. So now what am I supposed to do? So obviously it's a giant question. How do we prioritize, or how do you help your clients prioritize these things?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer that. But what do you do? How do you cope with something like that? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I don't know if I I think what you said a minute ago of trying to focus on the day-to-day things, trying to bring myself back to like, okay, what do I actually need to accomplish today? What are my goals for this time period in my life? But then sometimes that means climate change falls to the wayside, and that I just stop thinking about that. And so that maybe is good for my eco-anxiety, but in the long term, it's not actually changing anything or solving anything.
Yeah. I mean, I just ask because it's nice to get people's stories because that's what makes it more real, and so, it's so tough because we get so many messages from society and from environmental groups that we have to be working hard and changing. And so there is a kind of a belief that we shouldn't stop thinking about it. Like we have to keep bearing witness to it. If we don't, we're in denial. And then so part of it is, with so many, almost all mental health issues in therapy are, you'll find black and white thinking, and I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else. And when we're getting stuck, we're usually getting black and white about something where it's like either all or none. And that's kind of part of our brain and how it works. And particularly when we're anxious and stressed, that we more tend to be black and white, because that's the fight or flight response, the stress response, and if you're in a burning building, it is black and white. It's burning. I want to get out. That's pretty clear. But a lot of these modern issues are not so black and white. And there's a range, a spectrum. So a big process of my work with people is just getting them to be more on a spectrum of things, to where, I can be a good citizen and be doing my part for the environment, but doesn't mean I need to be ruminating on climate change all day. I mean, I might like to watch a TV show or something that I enjoy and I can get really into it, but it doesn't mean I need to think of it all day. And if I don't think of it all day, doesn't mean I don't like the show anymore or something like that. So, but again, it's a combination of talking through it, but also lowering our body temperatures, and relaxing a little bit. And, but
a lot of temperature related things.
Yeah. No, I mean, I use a lot of imagery, like, we have like a stress thermometer to use another temperature, like an old fashioned mercury thermometer. And, when the mercury is low, when our stress is low, we have a lot of bandwidth. We have a lot of creativity. We're flexible. We can go with the flow of things. But as that mercury creeps up, we get less bandwidth. We get less space. And there's a certain sweet spot where, we get focused and we still have some creativity, but we're really focused on something. That's, where people perform really well. But, as it creeps up more and more, we get kind of cramped in there and we get more, that's where the black and white thinking starts to come in. And, and that's true for anything, for public speaking or broadcasting or sports or in any kind of situation. And certainly true with the climate issue. So they're kind of walking around with a pretty limited bandwidth already with all the other stressors in the world. So part of the goal is to back off a little bit and create some more, flexibility. I mean, sometimes it's just fatigue. Like I say, despair is fatigue in disguise. Sometimes we're just tired and we need to rest, to get a little more creativity. But, to better answer your question, one of the models that I use to help people, I call it the upside down pyramid, or, writing the pyramid. Because when people are really super stressed, like we're in the Northwest here in the last couple of years with all the things going on, it's like we have this upside down pyramid, like over our heads, and it's pointing right at us, and we're just a little stick figure, and this huge pyramid is kind of looming over us, and we have a little triangle of resources, but we're trying to balance essentially an the growing pyramid of stressors between all the things in the world that you can worry about, and it is just crushing. So first of all, validating that feeling is helpful for people, because we all get there. But then, let's flip the pyramid over and put it on its base and stand next to the base. And let's just focus on the foundation of the pyramid, right? What are your daily activities for health to make you a good person? So, we're all human. We have some basic foundational bricks in our health: sleep, diet, exercise, social support, our families, our relationships, our daily work, our home, our pets, spirituality. There's a lot of standard bricks, so to speak. And then people have unique parts of their life that are, someone might garden, or they might be an artist, or a certain exercise routine or whatever, but, on any given day, we just got to do our foundation. Just show up and do your foundation. And then I think that organically creates some energy that's going to rise up. And that's where our goals and the capitalized stuff lives at that apex of the pyramid. But it is a point. So, at a certain point, we can prioritize what we want to put at the point. And so that can be a really good metaphor at the beginning when I'm working with someone to just again, and I say, like, we get upside down. Like, if I watch too much news and I'm stressed and I'm busy, I will start to feel that upside down, and I'll flip my pyramid, and so that buys us some time and some energy. And then, because the ultimate decisions about what we're going to do regarding climate change and stuff, that's a longer process. So we need to buy ourselves some time. These are problems and issues that are way bigger than us. They've been around longer than we have, and they will be around longer than we're alive. So it's really more, how do we want to orient our life and be the best person? So it's a lot of that, you're kind of creating some context and calming down, and then you're kind of leaning back in, so it's a bit of a wave. In environmental work, they talk about a despair and empowerment curve. So it's like you get excited about an issue and you want to learn about it and you want to take it on and solve problems. And once you get into it, you realize, oh, this is actually really complicated and it's not that easy to solve. And you start to get into a trough, of despair, and I can't do this. And then that's normal. And then you stay with the feelings, work through it. And eventually, something will grab you again. There's a current of life out there, and something will grab you and start pulling you, and you'll get excited again. But if you've been in broadcasting, and you've had your own curves probably in your creative work and stuff like that. But when people are really young and they're just getting started, particularly in environmental stuff, they haven't really learned about that curve yet. And so they think the first trough is it. Like, that's it. I'm never going to come out of it. But it's really it's just growing, it's just, we're naive. We take on things because we don't know any better. We think it's going to be easy and fun to solve problems. And we realize, gosh, there's a reason why people haven't solved this in 2,000 years.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean we don't turn around and eventually get back in the game. So.
Well, and that's what's the fact that it is never ending, has been going on forever, will continue to go on for probably forever, but at least for the foreseeable future. Seems like that is one thing that makes it different than if when I started going to my therapist for anxiety and depression. It's like, okay, these are the things I'm anxious about. We can deal with it. And maybe eventually those things don't make me anxious anymore, or those aren't issues. Maybe not. Maybe I just learned to cope with them and deal with them and prioritize it within my daily life forever and ever. But maybe eventually I don't need therapy because that anxiety has started to go away, or this medication can help it. But with climate change, that's not, you can't tell someone like, oh, just do this and it will be done and we'll get better.
No,
right?
It's kind of like someone working on civil rights or voting rights or any kind of big social issue, poverty, war, landmines, global peace. It's something you engage with for your life, and it's something you learn to be more resilient, and you learn to learn how to recharge your batteries and stuff like that. It's still the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, another image I use is this idea of like a sailboat. If you imagine like an old-fashioned sailboat, it has like a hole in the bottom. There's a keel. There's this heavy part of the hull that's under the water that you can't see, but it's usually a long, narrow thing that's heavy, and it keeps the sailboat, upright in the water, and it kind of makes it track through the water. And then the sails and things we see on the top are really light and kind of diaphanous, and they just can go around in different ways. And so our values and our identity and values is like the keel. Like, that's not going to change too much in our life. We have basic values. But on any given day, our sails might be full of good wind, and we might be sailing along, or we might be in a storm, or there might be no wind at all. And so, the emotions are going to be really fluctuating. They're like the sails, but the hull and the keel, that's our values. And so that's another part of this kind of work, is like, just stick with your values. That's ultimately we have no choice but to do our values, really.
Yeah.
But, if we can own those, that gives us a lot of strength. So, yeah, because I think we are unfortunately in, I'm not a climate scientist per se, but by my reading of things, I think the reality is we're in a few 100-year transition in our planet with all this climate change stuff, and things happen quicker than, it took a few thousand years for people to agree that the earth didn't revolve, that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around,
yeah.
And
it's not flat.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes time for these huge kind of reorganizations of our knowledge on the planet. And so climate change is kind of like that, really. And it's going much quicker because of technology and because of how fast things are moving. So we've come a long way, since 1950 or so, when the science was pretty set. It's not taking hundreds of years; it's taking decades, but it's still going to take more decades because there's just a lot of disagreement about the issue, and there are a lot of people, want to do business as usual. So, So I am not strongly optimistic, but I'm also not a doomer either. I do believe we're gonna get through this. The kind of odd.
That's good to know. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, like there was this recent New York Times story that came out, and I was involved in it, and I was talking to a young mom, and it was really important for her to hear me say, well, there are going to be some good days in the future. Your children will have some good days. It's not, there's going to be some bad days in the future. There'll be storms and droughts, and in certain places there'll be disasters. And if people are in the wrong place, it's going to be bad. So it's not like there's not going to be problems, but it doesn't mean there won't be some good days. Even through dumb luck, we'll be in a nice place and watch the sunrise or the sunset and have a fine day. And that was just helpful for her, And so I do believe that's a fair statement,
Yeah. Are you a coffee drinker or more of a tea person? And what do you like to mix into your caffeinated beverage of choice? Personally, this past year, I've gotten really into oat milk. At one point in the pandemic, I was even making my own, but that didn't really last very long. It did require some effort, and honestly, some mornings, even just making coffee seems like a lot of effort. And that's where Rise Brewing Company comes in. They make nitro cold brew coffee and sell it in cans by itself or mixed as an oat milk latte, an oat milk mocha, and they do tea too, like an oat milk London fog. Or you can just buy their oat milk by itself. Have I said oat milk enough times in the last minute? The point is, Rise provides energy for good people to do good things, and I think their coffee is really good. And their oat milk, obviously. To get some Rise for yourself, click the link in the show notes. It lets Rise know we sent you and helps support our show.
Now, back to the show.
Well, you mentioned the word doom, which made me think about doom scrolling. I would imagine is something that a lot of us do, myself included. You're like, something happens in the world. Now I need to look at Twitter and keep updating it because things are happening and I can't look away. And I just need to keep reading until I find the magical answer, but I just keep seeing more bad news. And then it's 2:00 in the morning and I am anxious. Is that, not that I know what that feels like. Is that something that is common for people that come and talk to you?
It is. Yeah, it is. And I think it's to the point where it's very much correlated with people's eco-anxiety levels. Mm-hmm. Or put another way, I could take anybody and make them eco-anxious if I subject them to enough troubling news, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is it's not the information, it's the process, it's the whole format. It's electronic media, which is, our phones are beautiful and fine, pieces of technology, but they're highly, highly addictive and they're designed to be addictive. And so we have to be careful about that. And there's no end. It's a machine. It never goes off. And so it's so easy to get sucked into this. And it becomes kind of addicting, like an addiction, almost like any other kind of technology addiction, to where people have to kind of do like a news break, a news fast, a news diet, or at least get conscious of of how often they're getting into their screen. So yeah, I do talk about that with people, and I try to do that too, because I will find myself getting sucked in. But when something big happens, like the war in Ukraine or COVID, you do naturally want to educate yourself. There's nothing wrong with being educated, but it's a slippery slope. The addictive pieces start to come in, and so we do have to kind of remind ourselves that like I say, our life is the news. Like your life is the news, your home, your relationships, where you live, your street, that's the news. And people think they're not going to be informed if they don't stay on their phones. But I actually think it's the opposite. I think we're more informed when we get off our phones. We're more informed about the true news of our life. Right. And, and so that's because that's the real life that's happening,
Yeah.
And so trying to think of ourselves as news and liberate ourselves from the consumeristic kind of thing. I'm working on a book project now, and I'm trying to think about how to go over all these topics that we're talking about. And so I was thinking about this, there's an adulting, climate adulting where I need to be an adult and I need to know what this is and I need to understand it. And that's a responsible thing. So there's one thing to be doom scrolling because I'm addicted and I can't pull myself off, and it's actually making my life bad. And that's not the same as a climate adulting where I actually take it seriously and realize this is a thing. I need to understand a bit of it, find some mature way to deal with it. So, but I do recommend a news break. I mean, again, you do a podcast, I do a podcast. So it's not like I'm a Luddite. I don't want people to use technology, but
right.
Turning your phone off for 20 minutes. Sometimes people, many people never turn their phone off ever. And they forget that they're essentially on 24 hours a day. And it does affect our nervous system. Even just having a phone in the room changes our heart rate, So practicing, little brief snippets, 20 minutes, an hour, that's why doing outdoor activities like hiking is nice. Sometimes you can get away from your technology, but the news is always a step away. You're never going to be, if something's really important, you'll hear about it orally. I've taken news fast where I haven't looked at the news for like a day or a couple of days, and if something's really important, I'm going to hear about it. Like humans have always communicated like that for thousands of years. So, but again, there's a bit of liberation here. And then this is not even unique to climate change. It's just a general mental health thing is to liberate ourselves from electronic media. Even doing more analog news, like reading a newspaper is very different for our nervous system.
Yeah.
Than watching televised news or electronic news. Something about the pace of like reading the news and seeing all the stories, it doesn't assault our nervous system in the same way. And so there are also ways to educate ourselves that aren't phone based. So no, I think you've hit on an important thing.
Definitely feels important in my life. Lately, I used to never let my phone die. And then a couple nights ago, it died at 9:00 and I was like, whatever. And then I woke up at 8:00. Luckily, my boyfriend had an alarm on his phone. And I was like, oh, my phone's been off for 11 hours and I'm okay.
Yeah. Life went on, so there is a bit of that illusion there. So it's something to play around with.
Yeah.
A big piece that I like to get in with people along the line of the values is this idea of environmental identity. Your environmental identity. It's kind of an idea that's pretty simple, but most people haven't heard of it. And I think it's kind of ready for prime time.
Well, this is prime time, so let's
yes,
go.
Exactly. So the listeners, you're on top of it here. But in the modern era, we're much more attuned to think about all kinds of identities, like our cultural identity, our racial identity, sexual identity, gender identity, all these different kinds of identities. So it's kind of our self-concept in relation to these different areas of life, right? And our environmental identity is our self-concept and beliefs about ourselves in relation to nature and the natural world, right? And like a lot of identities, we don't really know how to talk about it until someone gives us some language. I mean, we have some internal beliefs about this. We can't not have some mental models about all these things. But until we're giving language that's kind of silent, it's kind of unconscious. And so raising people's consciousness about this idea of environmental identity is big. And because that starts to become this core that then they can hold on to and understand. And then some of the surfacey things about like plastics and various things become more, that's a way of prioritizing, getting back to that whole prioritizing thing.
So is that kind of like, okay, I am going to be a person that has this specific diet. Like I'm not going to eat meat or I am going to eat these types of meat or whatever. And I'm going to be a person who buys a metal water bottle and doesn't buy a plastic water bottle. Are those the kind of things that
those are all
we
pieces.
Pick our identities, our environmental identity, or how do we actually figure that out?
Well, that's a very philosophical question there. That's a good one. But all those pieces,
identity.
Yeah. Identity in our culture, we do get some freedom to pick our identity, or at least people can if they want to. But then, identity is built over time. And so a lot of our identity is absorbed from our culture, from our parents. And so a good way to think about any kind of identity, but environmental identity just as well, is just do a timeline of your life, like from birth to the present. And what are the significant kind of events on that timeline that relate to your identity? Like for environmental identity, it would be like where you're from, where did you grow up? What was the landscape around you? What was your socioeconomic status? What did your parents do? What was the attitude toward nature and the natural world in your family? What did you learn in school? What did you pick up from the culture, from media, from books, from TV shows, from movies? Did you have pets? Were you around other animals? Did you go camping? Camping or hunting or fishing? All that kind of stuff makes our environmental identity. Then at a certain point, people start being actively choosing activities in life, and then we become more directive about our identity. So people travel, or they choose to study certain things, or approach, and seek out activities, right? And so that timeline helps people to flesh out this idea of their environmental identity and who they are. And some of our identity is chosen. Like we can be the person we want to be, move from where we grew up, have a different lifestyle than our family or parents if we want. A lot of it's based on education and privilege too, so there's different people are more privileged in some ways to make choices. So that's something to be aware of. And then of course some people, our identity is given to us by our culture. And for some people that's important, and they want to have that heritage and history. That's fine too. So it sort of depends on where you're from on the planet and what your family's like. But I think everybody has an environmental identity. And that's a clarification early on, because sometimes people hear this and they think, oh, that's an environmentalist identity. And like, then it gets back to the black and white, either I have it or I don't. I can't. That's a big blockage for people, because they think, oh, I want to be a part of sustainability or deal with climate change, but that's not me. Like I'm not an outdoor person, or I don't know about this. And so they kind of limit their possibilities. But really anyone, these are available. This stuff is available to anybody. Some people's environmental identity is strongly nature-based, where they want to be out in nature, camping or hiking or fishing or rock climbing, or maybe it's more domestic, where they're interested in gardening and being around their home. Sometimes it's more urban. Sometimes people are more, what they would say in the lingo, more utilitarian. So it's more like nature is something that humans use. So it's like in terms of like farming or livestock or industry. Some people are more spiritual about this, and it's really about their higher values about life or their religion. Some people are really into justice issues like animal rights or social justice. Some people are really into the science, and understanding things and understanding natural science or astronomy or whatever. So there's a lot of different flavors, different styles. And that's a really fun conversation to have. It's related to the climate stuff, because, we hurt where we care, as they say. So like if I'm concerned about climate change, it's because I have values and things that are important to me that are being threatened. Yeah. But, the environmental identity stuff is like, oh, wow, this is me and this is unique. And it's just a more positive conversation to have. And then it kind of makes sense why people, make consumer decisions about like what products to buy, or like the examples you were using earlier about like one example was about a metal bottle.
And diet.
Yeah, exactly. That those kind of lifestyle decisions flow from our values, our worldview, which is our identity, right? And so, anyway, so it's
or having kids is something you touched on, I think, before we started recording. But that's another whole thing, that choice to make in life. And do I want that? Am I ruining the world by making children? And
that's a huge one. Yeah, I was saying, as we were chatting earlier, my podcast, Climate Change and Happiness, climatechangeandhappiness.com, right? My podcast where we talk about climate emotions. We're all climate, all emotions all the time. Me and my colleague from Finland. And we have a 2-part episode series coming up on, child making decisions around having children or not, which is just a huge philosophical thing for people. And it's amazing how different people think about it. People think about it in different ways. And I learned a lot even from the episodes myself. But I have one daughter who's 14, and I feel really good about that. But I remember when I was younger, didn't think I wanted to have children, and I kind of got to a different place in my life where I felt good about that. But everybody has their story. But for some people, children are a link to the future. They're a source of meaning. So yeah, that's one of the really sad, tragic things about climate change, is that it really muddles this decision for people and makes it really hard for them, much harder. In the past, people might have been concerned about nuclear war, people have always had some concerns or stresses about having a child at different times, like during World War II or during nuclear war, or people that are dealing with poverty or war or any kind of thing. But yeah, climate change is a particular one. Luckily, more people are able to talk about it now, and there's more support and more resources. The Generation Dread, Gen Dread, there's a newsletter, Britt Ray does, one of my colleagues, called Generation Dread, Gen Dread. And
what a title.
It started because of her own dilemmas about whether she should have a child or not, because she was a science journalist and she knew all about this stuff. And she got into it, and she created her own kind of blog and newsletter. And now she has a book coming out. So
does she have a child?
She does.
I'm so curious. I'm like, wait, what'd she decide?
She decided to have a child. And I think part of her process, as she said, was not whether to have a child or not, but what it took to have a child and how you would approach that. So, but anyway, her book's just about to come out, and it fills a gap, that really wasn't there before. And in our podcast, we talked about it with another researcher who's been studying this, but she studies more of the African American community, and they have slightly different views on children and family than white communities, just culturally. But she was talking a lot about grandparents, and that's another kind of stakeholder for whether people have a child or not, is the grandparents, right? And there's a lot of interesting process where there's always been people that have been conscious about the environment and climate change. It doesn't matter what age you are. So there's a lot of like older folks that have a long time environmentalists. So it's not like all older folks are not interested in climate, but stereotypically younger people tend to be more attuned to this issue than older folks, just, according to broad statistics. And so there is a neat dialogue between the grandparent generation and the parent generation about what does it mean to have kids? And that's like one of the edges of climate change dialogue, because when grandparents realize, I might not have grandchildren because of this, because my kids don't feel comfortable having children, it makes them more aware of the issue and even more active. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. Thank you. One thing you've mentioned a few times, getting outside, our relationship with the outdoors, getting out in the environment. And I know that's another related, but also separate part of your therapy practice, where you do therapy actually outside, like people walking outside. And I know we all hear all the time, got to go get vitamin D, got to get outside. Don't forget it. You'll feel bad if you forget to do it. From a therapist perspective, with all the work you do, why do we need to do that? And how do we do it in a way that's useful to our brains?
Yeah. No, that's again, that's along with environmental identity, it's one of those kind of big coping categories that we need to talk about, because I mean, some of it is just enacting our values, because if we are outdoors people, we need to do it. We need to, because we feel better when we are our best self, when we enact our values. So whatever that happens to be, and what happens with a lot of people is as they get older, they take on more adult responsibilities, they get married or have children or have jobs, they do less outdoor stuff than they might have done when they were younger. So that's a phenomenon to be aware of. So they have less of those outlets. But safe outdoor places are really good for our mind and our body. Like, just even a brief time outside can help us clear our head and be more creative and look at things differently and reframe things. And then there's a whole physiological piece about being outdoors, being under, like right now the sun's out here and it looks kind of pleasant for a moment. And so when you step outside just passively without doing anything, your heart rate's going to slow down, your blood pressure is going to slow down, you're going to calm, and it's just good for your body. So it's good for the body and mind, and it's a dose response thing. So it's like the more I do it, typically the more benefits I get. So I can get some benefits from just a 5-minute stroll around the block during my workday. But if I spend 20 minutes or a half an hour, I might get a little more benefit in terms of exercise or reflection. If I spend an afternoon hiking in Forest Park or something like that, then I get more. If I spend a whole day or a weekend, so I get more. And eventually it becomes like a vacation where I actually get away from my life and I'm able to think about things. So there's like a spectrum. And then you have people, hiking the Pacific Crest Trail for weeks or months, and it's like changes their life.
Yeah.
So like I said earlier, there's a spectrum of nature. So it's like there's nearby nature like parks and gardens. There's the domestic nature like plants and pets, and even just virtual nature like pictures on our wall and just pretty things in our home. And then you've got, managed nature like forests and going to the ocean. And then you got wild nature like being out in the woods or up in the mountains. And, that's also part of our environmental identity. Some people gravitate to one aspect of that spectrum or not.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like you don't belong. You just got to find the place where you belong.
Yeah.
And then, the other pieces, it's about, when choosing activities, it's about what are my skills and resources and what's the challenge I want. So it's like a little equation. The more resources I have, I can take on more challenges. And so I might want to go backpacking or do some outdoor thing. And so some people are really into doing extreme things or, really adventurous things because they have a lot of resources. So they want to push themselves. For some people, just walking in Forest Park is a big challenge. It's okay. And then it's the meaning piece. So that the third factor is the meaning of it, because I might be a super extreme athlete and just might be strolling around Forest Park. So there's not a lot of challenge. But if I'm taking my young child and I'm playing in the creek, it might be beautiful. It might be all the meaning I need, so the meaning is important. And I might push myself way out of my comfort zone to try something very new. But if it means something to me, then I'll do it, So that's another neat conversation to have, is like, how do you find your own recipe? So I do a lot of, practically, I mean, in the old days when I was younger, I did, outdoor therapy where I'd go on like 3-week backpacking expeditions with young people. Would be out in the wilderness, and that was really immersive and really adventurous. But these days, I'll just do some of my sessions when walking sessions. So I'll meet clients at a local park that's got some good trails that aren't too challenging and also some privacy, and we'll just walk for an hour instead of meeting in an office, and that works pretty well for people. It's a self-chosen thing. Like, I don't force people to do it, but I offer it as an option, and a lot of people really like it.
Is that what you refer to as nature-based stress reduction?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a term. There's like all different kinds of stress reduction and mindfulness-based stress reduction, where people meditate. But nature-based is when I take that stress reduction stuff outside. Yeah. And some of it just happens passively, just by being there, and then I can deepen it by doing some meditation or walking or clearing my head or visualizing things and all that kind of stuff. So, reconnecting.
Well, I know it's 3:00. I want to make sure that I let you go, but where can people find you? Where can they come see you? and join, I'm sure, a never-ending wait list of people that want to come see you?
Well, I'm working on trying to do some groups. So I'm trying to find out ways to serve more people. So people can find me at selfsustain.com. That's my website. So www, the word self, the word sustain, selfsustain.com. That takes you to my practice website. And you can find a lot about me there. And then my podcast is climatechangeandhappiness.com. And that's a kind of a nice thing to listen to if you want to kind of hear some different sides about climate change.
By really smart people talking about it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm not worthy. These people, it's wonderful. I'm so happy that you're putting it out into the world. So,
well, I'm happy you're putting your stuff out into the world too and doing this podcast.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah.
Is there anything, any last words, anything I didn't ask you about that you want to say, or things people should know that, if they can't come see you for a full session, something they can do to take into their eco-anxious life?
Well, I would just, come away with us. I would try to come away with that idea of your environmental identity. Just remember that concept and that you do have an identity about nature and the natural world, and just start being attuned to your identity and then other people's, like your partner's identity. There's something, you can actually talk through this with people and it can be kind of nice. And I think that's a gift. Once you clue into that, it's a lifelong process like any other kind of identity. And it's a little bit of a different direction than just the concern and the driving to change. It's like, okay, I have an identity. This is important to me because it's part of myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing to hear.
And then kind of like build from, just like with every other identity, you can, if you're assured in your identity, then you can start figuring out what you want to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it takes a little while to be assured in our identity, and we're a little fragile. We're maybe a little sensitive about it or protective of it. That's normal too. Mm-hmm. But if you can find other people that share that, then it's a little safer, and then you can develop it together.
Well, thank you for everything you do. Thank you for answering so many questions. Clearly I could ask you a million more. That's why you have a podcast. That's why you talk to people constantly. But I think overall, thank you for just helping a lot of us feel like we're not totally crazy for having these feelings, and that it's normal, but it's not our sole problem to figure out either. So
that's right. Yeah, that's not our sole. It's not our sole problem, and it's quite normal and sane to be worried about these things, and getting with people that are coping in a healthy way and banding together with them is really a good thing to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, wonderful human, for listening to this episode of Mentally Together. I, Cassidy Quinn, will see you right back here next week. And in the meantime, go do something nice for your brain today. Go turn your phone off, take a walk outside in nature, and or ponder your environmental identity, maybe. Whatever will make your day just a little bit better. Because remember, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. Mentally Together is produced, hosted, and edited by Cassidy Quinn in collaboration with Koba FM, a podcast network that is all about community, baby.